Thank you very much and welcome. And first of all, I want to thank you, and I will explain in a minute. I want to thank you for not being Tony Blair. And I want to explain why I say that. A few years ago, the former British Prime Minister invited me to chat with him at his office in Jerusalem. He has an office as the representative of the International Court to the Middle East. And when we finished our conversation, not without differences of opinion, I said to him, Mr. Blair, nowadays we kindly invite you to visit our communities, to see by yourself the people, to look into their eyes, to hear their voices, to try to reach into their souls and understand them. And I will never forget his answer. Tony Blair's answer was, thank you very much, but I see you from my helicopter. No. And I thank you very much, distinguished guests, for not seeing us from your helicopter, but being with us, looking into our eyes, and identifying with us. Thank you very much for that. Now, you know, Israelis have a bad habit. We have many bad habits. But one of them is that we think that Israel is the center of the world. Well, in fact, it is, but it's not polite to say it so much as we do. Therefore, when I was last week in Spain, for instance, in the Spanish Parliament or in the Spanish Foreign Ministry, I was very tempted to talk about the Israeli interest, but I talked about why the sanctions that the European Union threatens to impose on our communities are detrimental to Europe, to Spain, and not just to Israel. And I would like to, not to talk today about Israel, but to talk about the United States of America. I understand that Secretary of State John Kerry wants, some would say desperately, to achieve a foreign affairs victory for the United States of America. There have been too many mishaps from Benghazi to Cairo to Damascus and to Tehran lately, and he wants very much a foreign relations success. And the way he chose, apparently, is to try to push for the establishment, I will say, the injection of a Palestinian state on these very hills in Judea and Samaria. And I dare to say that that strategy is not only misguided, but more than that, is counterproductive. It will do exactly the opposite. It will gain for the United States of America, for American diplomacy, another defeat. And not because of Israel, because of the Palestinians. And that defeat, that inevitably defeat, will be noticed very carefully in Tehran, in Moscow, in Damascus, in Caracas, in Pyongyang, in all the capitals around the globe that are yearning for another failure of the American diplomacy, for another decline of the status of the United States of America around the world. And why is that inevitable? That is inevitable because the Palestinian appetite is just insatiable. Look, you know, there are persons that doubt the sincerity of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he talks about two states, the two states formula. I must say by myself, and I know I'm being recorded by a journalist here, but I don't mind. I know that there are people there are mornings in which I wake up and I think that Netanyahu means it. There are mornings in which I wake up and I think he's bluffing the whole world. And I think that the same thing happens to Netanyahu himself. He doesn't know yet if he means that or not, because if he means that, it's against all he preached for many, many years, for many, many decades. But you cannot deny the commitment of his predecessor, of Ehud Olmert, for the two-state solution. It was almost a religious fervor for two-state solution. Just to make one point, our previous Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, offered the Palestinians that the most sacred places of Judaism and Christianity, the Wailing Wall, the Sepulchre, the Temple Mount, etc., would be administered by 5 nations, jointly by 5 nations, 3 of them Muslim: Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Palestine. Nothing to do with representative Jordan. And even that was refused by Abu Mazen, by Mahmoud Abbas. So the chance to establish, to reach an agreement on a peace treaty by injecting here, by creating here a Palestinian state is just impossible. And what will happen in a few months from now, after that comes completely clear, is unfortunately an additional decline in the status of the United States of America in the international arena. Now I will tell something about Israel. Israel wants the United States of America to be the world leader. I think it's the only country, it's the only superpower in the world that has the right values, that has the right beliefs, that has the right ideology, that advocates freedom and liberty and democracy all over the world. The world needs a strong United States of America. And that is the reason why we see here in Israel, many of us, I would say most of us, we see with anxiety this wrong path that the United States diplomacy is taking in the Middle East. I will say a few more words. There is an alternative. There is an alternative. 20 years after Oslo, the Oslo Accords, and I see here that you have on your tables an article that wrote my good friend, the late Mayor Nachman, about the Oslo Accords. 20 years after Oslo, but really 75 years since this issue of two states was put on the table by the British in the 30s of the last century. 75 years is the only game in town, and we are not even 1 inch closer. I think any responsible person, any responsible country should ask itself, maybe there is something wrong with the formula. It's not a coincidence, it's not bad luck. The formula is completely wrong. Let's explore different paths. And there is a different path. And I want to suggest to you, as legislators, as influential people in the United States of America and Washington, D.C., I want to suggest to you a different path. There are 2 ways in which we can march. One is the conventional one, the one chosen by Secretary Kerry, the political path that is completely futile, that will lead nowhere. And there is another path. There is the constructive path, the human path. A path that is maybe less glorious or less heroic, maybe do not win are awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for that, but it has one tremendous advantage. It's a path that touches the lives of millions of people and not just of 5 or 6 or 7 diplomats that spend their nights now in 5-star hotels all over the world negotiating. That is the path of coexistence. That is the path of enhancing a model of peaceful coexistence, even if not reconciliation. A friend suggests me the name of peaceful non-reconciliation for that path. Maybe we will not solve all the problems, We will not solve the political, the big problem. Maybe it will have to wait for a while. As a candidate of a major party that I will not name now said in a speech, that we will kick the can down the road for a few years. And he was right, of course. But in the meantime, we can do a lot of beneficial things. I will give you just 2 small examples, and with that I will wrap up my presentation. I understand that the timetable is pressed. The refugee camps. We have in Judea and Samaria, I think, a dozen of so-called refugee camps, Palestinian refugee camps. Not for Jews, of course. The million Jews that were evicted from Arab states in 48, we rehabilitated in a few years. And no one is today, of course, a refugee in Israel. But the Palestinian so-called refugees, are they refugees? This is the 5th generation. The 5th generation, the children of the great-grandchildren of the original refugees are still living in squalid conditions. Welcome, Congressperson Bachmann. The 5th generation is still living in squalid conditions in refugee camps with the status of refugee, maintained by a corrupt UN agency. I will tell you one thing, that when I learned of that, I was amazed. They live in, the refugee camps are neighborhoods, for instance, of Nablus. They do not vote for the municipality of Nablus because they are not considered resident. For 65 years, there are refugees who did not even vote for the municipal elections. And mainly, they live in squalid conditions. Imagine what difference it could make to the Palestinians, to the world, to Israel, to the coexistence between us, if instead of keeping that tragedy, instead of maintaining a completely useless negotiation that everyone knows that will lead nowhere, we would engage in an ambitious project to take them out of the status of refugee, rehabilitating them, renovating their refugee camps. And I will give you a final example. And why we do not do that? Why is not that incredible simple thing is not done? Because we are waiting for the resolution of the political process, and we keep going and going and going for decades and decades and decades, as these persons keep suffering. Palestinians. They are entitled to dignity. They are entitled to a modern life in the 21st century. And we are very much in favor of that. And I will give you a last example. You are going to visit the Ariel University, an extraordinary center of higher education, in which I had the privilege also to teach finance a few years ago and to be a member of its executive committee. I will tell you a very short story. In northern Samaria, there is a cluster of Palestinian villages that for centuries they produce coal out of wood in very primitive but traditional methods. And they want to keep doing that. That's their tradition. But that's very hazardous to the environment and mainly to their health. The life expectancy on those villages is 20 years lower than the average Palestinian life expectancy. The Ariel University suggested to engage in a research project to find a method which can both keep the tradition but avoid the health and environment hazards. And even suggested to do it in cooperation with the Palestinian University. And they asked for assistance from the binational Israeli-American Scientific Fund. Monetary assistance. Now it's a win-win situation. The Palestinians will gain 20 years of life in those villages. Not a small thing, 20 years. Israel would do a thing beneficial to humanity, as we like to do. We did it in Haiti, we did it in Turkey after the earthquakes, we want to do it also to our Palestinian neighbors. The United States could put their flag at the top of this incredible beneficial project. The answer from the State Department is no, veto. The Ariel University is located in Samaria, therefore not even 1 cent. This is the path in which I suggest the United States of America engage. The constructive path, the human path, the path that makes coexistence from the grassroots, and finally, when it comes from the grassroots, believe me, it will also trickle up into the leadership and into the leaders and to the people, and it will enhance peace. Instead of that, unfortunately, what the United States of America is doing today, with the arrival this evening of your Secretary of State, John Kerry, is exactly the opposite. Going through a completely useless path that, as I said, benefits the life of a few people that are part of this, what we call sometimes this peace process industry, that became a religion and an obsession completely out of touch with reality. And my last request for you, gentlemen and ladies, we have here for us many people that visit Washington, D.C. frequently. First and foremost, she's not here, Ruth Lieberman, that I understand that Jim knows very well, that is going to be in Washington very shortly in order to exactly deal with these matters of Ariel University and others. Eli Piepsh from the Yesha Council, Avi Zimmerman from Ariel, David Ahivri from Shomron, Jeff Dauber from ZOA. I think that if I have one request I want to extend to you, convey in Washington this understanding that the path in which your country is going in the Middle East is counterproductive. It will bring ultimately, as already happened once in 2000, frustration, and frustration here unfortunately brings usually violence. Instead of that, there is a way of peaceful coexistence from the grassroots, from the ground, between the people, forging, I would say, almost spontaneous coexistence that is being forged right now. We will be in Ariel, Palestinians, Arabs, students by the hundreds. This is the path in which we pray we can advance, because this is the real path that makes difference, and this is the real path that ultimately will make peace. Please extend every help you can to our people that come to Washington to advocate for these innovative, but to these realistic ideas instead of the worn out, you said, Congressman, diplomatic ideas. Yes, it's time to engage with real people and not with diplomats. Thank you very much.